Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking at the game against Chelsea by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also bringing you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Luka Milivojevic and Cheku Kouyaté after the game. So let's begin. Stamford Bridge rose to pay their respects before kick-off, a day before Remembrance Sunday, in a poignant moment before the football started in West London. With Palace facing their fourth side in the top six in a row, the fast start from Frank Lampard's side was expected. And the Blues very nearly had Reece James on the score sheet twice in a week, with a fullback miscued cross nearly sailing into the back of the net. However, as Gaeta has done so often this season, the keeper reacted well to tip the ball around the post. Palace sat deep and compact as Chelsea probed to try and find a way through the well-drilled banks of Roy Hodgson's ranks. On 12 minutes, Pulisic looked certain to score after a diving run from Willian found him inside the box, but Gaeta again thwarted well, getting down to smother Pulisic's effort. 2 minutes later, Willian attempted to get his name on the score sheet, and despite the groans of excitement from the home ends of Stamford Bridge, Gaeta's non-pulse reaction to the effort suggested it wasn't as close as many felt. Willian was again involved 3 minutes later, only this time he ended up in referee Mike Dean's book for a tactical foul. The challenge stopped a Jordan Ayew-led breakaway from a corner after Cheku Kouyaté's crunching tackle on the edge of the area dispossessed Mason Mount to create the counter-attack. The game petered through to almost half-time without much of note, as Palace defended solidly and Chelsea looked to remain patient. However, on 43 minutes the Eagles were forced into a change, as Joe Ward had to be replaced by Martin Kelly due to injury. Seconds before the first half ended 0-0, Chelsea were left cursing, letting Gary Cahill switch from West to South London in the summer. With Gaeta on the floor from the initial first save, the ball fell to Willian, who looked certain to score. However, Cahill showed his experience with an incredible last-ditch block to send the midfielder's shot wide. The second half carried on in a similar fashion, and on 52 minutes, Tammy Abraham held his position to stay onside and slopped past Gaeta after controlling a delicate flick from Willian. Gaeta did not let his loss of a clean sheet faze him though, when on 58 minutes the shot stopper pulled off an outrageous flying save from Pulisic that was hammering towards the top right corner of the Palace goal. Palace's need for a minimum of an equaliser saw the Eagles push out, and James Tonkins so nearly tied the game on 69 minutes. Unmarked, the defender found space just outside the 6-yard box, and from an Andros Townsend free kick headed just wide. It wasn't to be for the Eagles in the early kick-off though, as Pulisic headed home from close range 10 minutes from time, reacting smartly to a deflected strike from former Palace striker Michy Batshuayi. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like me who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts, whether that be on Twitter or Facebook, then of course do head over to the respective sites and follow our accounts on there at Crystal Palace. And obviously if you do want a place to get all the latest Palace news, then of course I'd recommend you do follow us on there, because of course things such as injury news, stuff about the academy, about the ladies team, ongoing developments including sort of the academy training ground, anything like that, sort of the general club news that you want to keep up to date with, of course I'd recommend you do follow us on our social media pages there. And obviously alongside that we obviously keep up to date with the latest transfer news, so even though we're not in a transfer window now, there's loads of rumours going on about what might happen in January and certainly what may even happen in the summer as well, so there's lots of speculation in the run-ups to the transfer windows. And of course, as you've probably seen if you already follow us during the summer, we obviously regularly keep up to date with all the different sort of transfer news, so whether that be players coming in, players going out, interviews with sort of agents giving us sort of insights into what might happen, and of course sort of rumours in general what might happen. So of course if you want a place to get all the latest news as well as sort of your transfer news as well in particular, and finding out the ins and outs, and as soon as they're sort of rumoured or as soon as they've happened, of course follow us on there. And then obviously alongside that we obviously post interviews as well, so whether that be with players, with management, and going back to transfer news, if we get an agent say something which might suggest a transfer might be imminent or a transfer might be a possibility, of course we'll post these interviews on there as well. And like I said, even though we're not in a transfer window right now, there's going to be lots of rumours going in and loads of interviews going into the January transfer window. So of course, do follow us so you can keep up to date on all of that. And obviously, the final thing really that we do sort of get involved with on the account is obviously giving our own opinions. So if you are someone who wants to get involved, you know, before the games, talking about, you know, our reaction or reacting to our reaction to sort of the team news, to injury news, and of course after the game, that instant match reaction. If you're someone who wants to have another page to obviously read someone's opinion, but also to share your opinion and also get involved, of course I'd highly recommend you do join or do follow our Twitter page, obviously, because literally straight after the game we give our reaction there. Straight after any news is announced, we obviously, you know, give a reaction there, and of course, you know, before the game, just giving our predictions, what we think the lineup might be, all things like that. So if you'll do want another page where you can get all of the news, all the transfer news, all the interviews, as well as obviously just another place to follow to get opinions, of course I'd highly recommend you do follow our pages on there. Now obviously another place, or a great place for you guys to share your opinion, is of course in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with of course 10 being the best. Now like I said, the reason I want you guys to do that is that rather than me just having my opinion of the players' performances and my sort of outlook on the game, you guys can comment below how you thought the players performed, and obviously even if you don't want to do that, just your general views of the game, and that's just so I can compare my opinion to yours and we can have a discussion based on the back of that. So rather than me just having my general view of the game, I of course can read the comment section, have a look at how you guys thought players performed, and just have a discussion, or you know, just change my opinion based on that, because of course no one is ever right, and there may be things that maybe you picked out or you saw in a game that maybe I missed, and vice versa. So of course, if you want to get involved, you want to share your opinion, of course feel free to do that in the YouTube comment section below. And you know, even if you're not a Palace fan, if you find yourself, you know, a Chelsea fan, find yourself on the channel, comment below with your views of the game, because of course you're going to be really happy. 2-0 win, clean sheet, alright day for you. Whereas a Palace perspective, yes, it was on a right first half performance. First half 0-0 at half time, that was great, but in the second half, as soon as we conceded, there was no plan B, and that was the disappointing thing for us. So you've got two different perspectives there of the game. So of course, if you want to comment below or you want to share your views of the game, of course don't hesitate to do it in the comment section below. But like I've said, you know, mainly I want you guys just to put out your player rating so that we can just compare how we thought the players performed, and you know, see that if we did have a similar outlook on the game, because I'm sure certain players, particularly in this game here, people may think were good, and then likewise other people will go, actually they were one of the reasons why we had no plan B, just because they didn't do much more in the game. So of course feel free to share your differing views of the game. Now if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join our Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting and go with Vicente Guaita, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now in terms of Guaita's performance, you know, I've given him a 7 because aside from the goals we conceded, I think it was a fairly decent performance from him, and considering he's just come back from injury, you know, he's slotted into the team straight away and performed like he has done all this season. So there isn't really too much to talk about him in terms of his overall performance, but there are a few fine moments that I obviously want to pick out in the game. Now, really early on in the game, obviously Pulisic had a great chance, obviously put Chelsea ahead, and of course Guaita made himself big, made that really good save, and that sort of set the precedent for that first half, because of course in that first half we were just really good defensively, but didn't really have anything on the attack, and that's why we went in at half time at 0-0, just because we were defensively solid, and you know, people like Guaita were making themselves count, and obviously in Guaita's case he made that save to deny Pulisic and to obviously keep us ahead, or not keep us ahead, but keep us at 0-0 at that point in the game. Now in terms of Abraham's goal, couldn't really do too much about that. Not really going to dwell too much on that, because of course, you know, yes, we go 1-0 down, but that's because Chelsea are by far a better team, but we should have had that plan B to counteract with that, but we didn't. And of course you can't really blame Guaita for that, because obviously the rest of the team are at blame for that as well. And of course, you know, Abraham's on form this season, so understandably he scores a goal, not much more you can do there. Now of course right after that, you know, Abraham's goal, he had another chance, Pulisic, to obviously put Chelsea 2-0 ahead, and once again Guaita made himself big and made the save there. So whilst overall Guaita's performance, there isn't too much to talk about, but the fact that he made these two saves in particular from Pulisic, as well as other you know, I wouldn't say fantastic saves, but other good saves, you know, throughout the game to obviously keep us at 0-0 up until half time, and of course after that, just stopping us conceding any more, just to keep the damage at 2-0. The fact that he was able to make these important saves throughout the game was really, really impressive for me to see. And, you know, like I've said, I've given him a 7 because of the good saves he made and because of his overall performance that he had. And I think the fact that he had an injury, come back into the team and just slotted in straight away and looked like he hadn't actually been away for 2 games or so, just really goes to show how good of a season he's having, the fact that he can just slot back in to the team. So once again here, Vicente Gaeta, good performance from him, with 2 saves in particular from Pulisic, which did impress me. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our defence, and that is the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now obviously Joe Ward's performance, you know, there isn't really too much to talk about because just before half time he got taken off with an injury, which, fingers crossed, touch wood, isn't too serious. But the fact that, you know, we haven't heard too much good news regarding the injury after the game obviously is leading to speculation as to what might happen, and of course whether someone like Kelly might have to replace Ward for a period of time. So I'm not really going to talk too much about the injury side of it, obviously, until we know the facts, until we know how long he's out for. But nevertheless, I've given him a 5 only because he was on the pitch, I think it was about 40 minutes or so, didn't even get to the end of the first half, and arguably up until that point he didn't necessarily have the greatest of afternoons, and that's just down to him actually marking Christian Pulisic. Now we know he's been, last sort of few games or so, he's started to get into his rhythm, started to settle into the Chelsea side. So of course it was a really tough afternoon for Ward. You know, before all the injury stuff happened, you know, Ward was struggling just a little bit up against Pulisic, and arguably you could say that he done a fair job up against him, in the fact that Pulisic didn't have too many chances, aside from, you know, the ones that Gaeta saved. But likewise, you know, Joe Ward, you know, maybe could have done a little bit better to defend against him. But it's no disrespect to Ward, only just, you know, because Pulisic is such a good player that obviously it was always going to be tough, and it was quite evident in the game that he was struggling for that. Now obviously you've got to give Ward a little bit of credit, because despite it being difficult to mark Pulisic, I think he stuck to his task, done what he had to do, and whilst Pulisic may have got past him a few times, you know, given the fact that it was so tough, he still was able to come above it a few times and obviously defend well against him on a few occasions. Now of course, you know, other than that, there isn't really too much of note to talk about his performance, other than the fact that he obviously got taken off injured just before the break, obviously hobbling off, looks like sort of I think it was an ankle injury. Obviously it's not always that clear, but of course going into the next sort of the international break and then the games after that, it's looking likely, the fact that he had to go off so early in the game, you know, couldn't even make it to half time, suggests that it may be a little bit more of a serious injury than maybe sort of a little knock. So we'll see what happens there. But like I've said, this performance here, it was a tricky afternoon for Ward up against Pulisic. Done all right, but maybe you could argue maybe could have done better on a few occasions. But the fact that he got taken off just before half time with the injury just really summed up his performance, and that's why I've given him the 5 overall. So I'm now going to move on to the first of our 2 centre-backs, and that is Gary Cahill, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. So obviously the first thing really to say about Cahill, obviously this is the first time he's returned to Chelsea since leaving in the summer, and actually I've given him a 7 because what a performance it was from him. You know, it may not have been sort of your man of the match standard performances we've seen from him in previous games this season, but given that pressure of going back to your old club, and, you know, even though the fans were obviously cheering him on, and both sets of fans were giving him praise, you know, even though it was a big occasion, the fact that he didn't let that affect him and actually still put in a good performance defensively was really, really great to see. And, you know, like I've said, first time leaving or playing against them since leaving in the summer. So the fact that he reacted and just stayed professional as ever and used his experience just to help us throughout the game without letting that occasion get to him was, of course, great to see. Now, obviously, in terms of a moment in the game which really stood out for me, and that was obviously first half injury time. Willian had a chance right inside the box, you know, would have made it 1-0 at half time, and, you know, maybe that could have changed the whole complex. Scoring late in that first half could have changed the complex of the rest of the game. So the fact that Cahill made himself big, made that superb block to obviously deny Willian and deflect the ball and get it out of danger was really, really great to see. And that sort of moment in particular stood out for me, in the fact that yes, you're playing against your old club, but you're still going to do all you can to stop your old club from scoring against your new club. So the fact that he just put his body on the line, forgot all about, you know, Chelsea, and just, you know, gave his all for Palace, in particular that chance there, just gave his all to stop Willian from scoring, was of course great to see. But, you know, like I've said, you know, aside from the 2 goals we conceded, you know, I think as a team we defended relatively well. It's just the lack of that plan B we had in attack, which obviously led to us having a disappointing performance, in the fact that, yes, we were defensively solid, but going forward, we were absolutely useless. So, in terms of Cahill's performance, on the whole, I think he put in a really, really good shift. Didn't let the occasion get to him. Used his experience and his quality to obviously limit Chelsea's chances. And even when they did have chances, as we saw with that Willian chance, he was there to make these sort of last-ditch challenges, these recoveries, to obviously deal with that really well. So I think on the most part, aside from the goals we conceded, a really, really solid performance from the whole defence. But obviously, Cahill in particular, on his return to Stamford Bridge, I think he put in a really, really solid shift there at centre-back. Of course, his centre-back partner in this game was James Tompkins, and I'm going to give him a 7 also for the game here. Now, much like Cahill, I think I can say much the same for Tompkins in the fact that he was fairly solid throughout the whole game. Aside from the goals we conceded, I think you've got to give Tompkins quite a lot of praise, particularly in that first half, for just how well we defended, how compact we were at the back. And whilst that limited us and obviously led to us not having a plan B when Chelsea scored, first off, when you're playing against top 6 teams, you need to defend well, and that's certainly what we saw from Cahill and Tompkins at the back. Now, of course, prior to Abraham scoring his first goal, obviously he had a few chances himself, and I think that Tompkins in particular was one player who dealt with Abraham fairly well throughout the whole game, aside from the goal. So I think you've got to give him credit there, because you've got someone like Ward who was dealing with Pulisic, was of course, Pulisic got the better of him. Whereas Tompkins here, once again, aside from that goal, I think he done a fairly good job in terms of dealing with Abraham, which of course we've got to give him credit for. Now, of course, Tompkins, we know how much of an aerial threat he can be at both sides of the pitch, obviously defending against opposition balls into the box, and of course when we put balls into the box, he can be a threat there. Now, people could argue that he probably should have scored from this chance. Obviously, I think it was Andros Townsend put a ball into the box. Tompkins got his head on it. Literally, really, really free header, and he put it just wide of the mark. Now, you could say that on another day, maybe that header goes in, or the goalkeeper makes a save because it's going to go in, or, he puts it even wide than he did do. But when you've got a chance like that, when you've got no plan B, you need to take all of the chances you have. And it would have been a little bit nicer just to see him put that header a little bit more on target, because given the fact that it was a free header and he still put it wide, was something that was a little bit disappointing. But like I've said, the fact that he defended well, he read the game superbly at times in terms of whenever Chelsea were on attack, he was in the right position, he was making the right decisions to make challenges, to make blocks. So everything about his defensive side of his game was great. It's just that if he just put that header a little bit more on target, then we could have made it 2-1, I think it would have been at the time. And maybe it could have been a whole different story in the game. But, at the end of the day, we should have had a plan B, and we shouldn't have had to be relying on chances from centre-backs scoring from set pieces to us to get back into the game. And I think that's something that's going to be a continuous theme throughout the podcast, is the fact that, yes, we defended well, but once Chelsea scored, there was no plan B to try and get back into the game. So we really, even though Tompkins should have done better with that chance, we shouldn't be relying on it overall. So I think as a whole, defensive-wise, dealing with Abraham, reading the game well, making the challenges and blocks when he has to, much like Cahill before him, I think that obviously Tompkins had a fairly solid performance, fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our back four, and that is the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of Van Aanholt's performance, I suppose it was much the same with Ward's for obviously the limited time he was on the pitch, in the fact that he found it a little bit difficult, obviously, to deal with the threat that Chelsea had. But then, there weren't any terrible moments throughout the game where you could pinpoint that and go, you were absolutely terrible defensively. So I think a 5 overall is a fair reflection of his performance. And I suppose, what you've got to understand is, because we were so negative in terms of our approach to the game, we were so defensive, obviously it was good for us because obviously we didn't concede until the 51st minute or whatever it was, so we were defensively solid. But obviously people like Van Aanholt obviously limited what they could do in the game, and because we were playing on the back foot, because we were playing so negative, it just meant that players like Van Aanholt, like Ward, and obviously Kelly when he came on, obviously meant that they just found it a little bit more difficult than they would do, because all the pressure was on us just defending. Obviously made it a little bit more difficult defending against Chelsea. But what I've got to say is that even though we were playing so negatively throughout the game, there were a number of times where we actually did get forward from defence. He was looking to hit Chelsea on the counter-attack, and I suppose that's something you've got to give him a little bit of credit for, because other players in the team, because we were playing so negative, they were just staying back. So it was nice to see him actually going up and down that left-hand side, and maybe not much as he would have liked to, but nevertheless, nice to see actually someone in the team actually trying to try and turn that defence into attack by obviously getting up and down the flanks. But I suppose for me, the main thing for me is that there was nothing impressive, nothing terrible about his game, so that's why I've given him a 5. But I suppose defensively, you know, yes, he'll have better days in terms of his defensive work, doing a lot better there. But the fact that he just stuck to his tasks in defence is the thing which is important for me. So rather than him having a complete terrible game and making loads of defensive errors, I'd rather him just have an average game, just doing the basics right and not being fantastic up against the opposition, as opposed to having an absolutely calamitous game. So I suppose on that in that aspect, you've got to say, you know, at least you've done that. But then likewise, he could have done better in some other areas as well. So I think overall, for Van Aanholt's performance, I do think the 5 is overall. But much like Ward on the other side, I think just our negative approach to the game put a lot more pressure on us defensively. Even though we were good defensively, just put more pressure than probably what was needed. And obviously that led to players' performances not being as good as they arguably should or could have been. So once again here, Patrick Van Aanholt fully deserving of the 5 I've given him. So now I'm going to move on to the first midfielder in our team, and that is the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now in terms of Luka's performance, you know, I've given him a 6 because it wasn't necessarily a terrible performance from him. But, you know, I gave him a lot of praise last weekend because he was one of the only players who actually came out from that first whistle, looked raring to go, looked like the player who actually wanted to get things done against Leicester. And just that approach and mentality from the start of the game was really, really great to see. Now, obviously, he couldn't quite replicate it here against Chelsea, and, you know, whether that's because Chelsea just, obviously they're on great form, so whether it's just the quality of the opposition we were up against, because even though obviously Leicester are good, but of course likewise Chelsea are just as good this season, if not better. So you've got to look at it both ways and go, actually, you know, if he was up and raring to go against Leicester, why couldn't he do it against Chelsea? So whilst that was the case and he was not at his best in the midfield, you've got to give him a bit of slack because, of course, once again, the quality of the opposition, and obviously we were playing away from home, whereas against Leicester we were playing at home. So that home advantage, or so-called home advantage, maybe that's why he was up for the game more than say like he was up against for the Chelsea game. But anyway, you know, aside from that, I think that he did show a couple of nice touches in midfield, and, you know, given how good we know Chelsea are in midfield this season, obviously it's really important to maintain possession. And even though we didn't have too much possession, when we did have it, you know, Luka was still looking to get on the ball, having a few nice touches here and then. And of course, when he had set piece opportunities, you know, particularly from free kicks in and around the Chelsea area, obviously he was whipping in a couple of dangerous crosses. And whilst none of them actually came to anything, aside from, you know, a few headers which, you know, Chelsea were able to deal with relatively well, obviously it was a little bit disappointing in the fact that, yes, we had these chances, we whipped in crosses, but we had no one to obviously convert them. And it goes back to that point about having no plan B, because we didn't have that plan in place to make sure, you know, once we go behind, we actually can have at least a chance to get back into the game. Because we didn't have that, when people like Luka had these chances to whip crosses in to put the defence of Chelsea under pressure, we didn't really utilise them as much as we should have done. So whilst Luka's performance last weekend was great in terms of looking raring to go, one of the only players on the pitch who actually looked fully up for the game here against Chelsea, whether it's because we were away from home, whether it's just because of the quality of the opposition, not that Leicester are bad, it's just the fact that, you know, historically Chelsea are the better team. Whatever it was, he wasn't quite raring to go and up for the game as he was last weekend. And whilst he showed a few nice touches here and there, we would have expected a little bit better from him, because in games like this where you're up against quality of the quality of the opposition like Chelsea, you've got to have one player who actually stands up, you know, and just gives their all, or has these moments of quality to at least help you get something in the game. And obviously, as the captain, you expect it to come from him, but because that was limited in the game, that was lacking, that was obviously why I was a little bit disappointed in his overall performance. But like I've said, I do think the 6 is a fair reflection, given the fact that he's still done some of the basics right, and he still had a few good touches here and there. So I do think overall, on reflection, the 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the second midfielder, and that is Cheikhou Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Kouyaté's performance, it was much the same to Luka's in the fact that, yes, there were some good parts of his game, and he looked to get involved in terms of dealing with that threat that Chelsea have in midfield. And whilst that was the case, he obviously wasn't as good as, say, we've seen him be in other games this season. So that's why, like Luka, I've given him a 6. But what I've got to say about his performance, and this is something we always seem to see from him, and whilst it was to sort of a lesser extent in this game here, against Chelsea, I still think he was very combative in midfield. The fact that he was looking to get involved, looking to use his physicality and his pace to obviously get the better of Chelsea down the middle. So the fact that he showed that sort of combative attitude to obviously get involved in the game and look to sort of limit Chelsea down the middle was of course great to see. And something really for me that sticked out is the fact that obviously we're not going to have a lot of possession against a team like Chelsea, so the fact that we had someone like Chiarte down the middle who rarely concedes possession, was holding on to the ball really well and just maintaining the possession, or the limited possession we already had, was of course great to see. So that mixed with sort of his combative approach to the game really was quite a nice thing to see, because you've got someone who, when on the ball, can obviously not concede the possession and can do stuff with the ball, and then when not on the ball, you have that combative attitude where you can put in challenges and win the ball back so that you can carry on with possession. So the fact that his work in the midfield was really good to see. The fact that he had that approach to the game, but then because he didn't quite have that quality to deal with the opposition of Chelsea, the quality that Chelsea had, that's obviously understandable that you can't really deal with that, and that's why he didn't really have any real impact on the game. So whilst what he was doing was really good, like Luka, in terms of not conceding possession, being combative, trying to limit Chelsea in midfield, whilst they were doing all of the right things, they didn't really have enough, and that's just down to the quality that Chelsea has. They're just that bit above us, that all of the good work we can do, they can just surpass that with obviously the quality they have in midfield. And I suppose what really summed up his performance is that even though he worked hard, even though he's one of our better midfield players, he got taken off with 10 minutes to go, and that was just because obviously Hodgson would just wanted to change things up. But if I was Hodgson, you've got someone like Chiarte who's done well throughout the game, and if you are going to take him off, and I'll talk about this later on, you need to bring someone more attacking on. But instead Hodgson just went, I think he brought McCarthy or whoever it was on for Chiarte, rather than actually bringing on an attacking player who could actually make a difference to the team. So once again here, a very sort of good performance in terms of what he was doing in the game from Chiarte, but it wasn't quite enough to deal with the quality that of course Chelsea posed. So I do think on reflection the 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. So as you can see, there's sort of a reoccurring theme with the midfield, and I've given them all 6s, and that's just because they were doing some of the right things in the game. It's just the quality of Chelsea was too much to deal with. And in terms of McArthur's performance, much like what I've said for the last 2 players in terms of Luka and Chiarte's performances. But in terms of the first thing for me is the fact that obviously there was lots of speculation before the game. Would McArthur start, and would he even be in the team? Because of course he was missing last weekend, and that was obviously the back problem to start the game. And the fact that he recovered from that injury obviously meant that even he's not 100% fit, so of course going into a game against a team of the quality of Chelsea, he was always going to find it difficult because he's not 100%. But it was nice to actually see him back in the team, because of course we missed him last weekend against Leicester. So the fact that he recovered was a really positive thing from that back problem, so it was nice to see him back into the team. And much like Chiarte, he was very busy in midfield, in the middle of the park, trying to make it difficult for Chelsea, trying to close down channels. So the fact that he recovered from that injury just allowed him to slot back into the team and just give us what we were missing against Leicester, and that was of course really, really nice to see. But the thing that I was a little bit disappointed with is the fact that last few games or so we've seen him play a little bit further wide like he's done in previous seasons, whereas in this game here, obviously because we were trying to deal with Chelsea and we had that negative approach, obviously meant he didn't have much impact in an attacking sense. And obviously that's mainly down to the way we approached the game, with him playing slightly more deeper. But when we're on the counter-attack, you want to have that transition between the defence to midfield and the attack. So it would have been a little bit nicer to see McArthur, when we were on the counter-attack, just to have more impact offensively by just being in these more attacking positions, because that would have been a little bit nicer to see. Because whilst he was doing all of the good work, he was busy in midfield looking to get involved, and whilst all of that good work didn't equate to anything just because of the quality that Chelsea had, it still would have been a little bit nicer just to see him being more adventurous going forward. Because even though we had no plan B, if players just took it upon themselves to go, actually, I'll let Chiarte and Luka do that defensive work, and I'll just go a bit more further forward like I've done in previous games. And if we just had that extra man attacking in the attacking positions, then maybe we could have had a chance to get back into the game. But because we had no plan B, obviously meant for the most part of the game, before substitutions came on, even though they weren't attacking, we still just stuck with this plan A of being really, really defensive. Meant that people like McArthur, who could have made an impact and could have been that plan B playing slightly further forward. Because we didn't do that, obviously limited our overall game. But for me, I think 6 is a fair result, obviously for the whole midfield, but for McCarthy in particular. Mainly for me is the fact that he recovered from his back injury, and the fact that he played as well as he did off the back of an injury. Obviously you've got to give him credit for that, and the fact that he, even though the quality that Chelsea have in midfield, and like the rest of the team, even though we couldn't deal with them 100%, the fact that he just still showed that usual busy self, looking to make it difficult for them, and even though they sort of got the better of us in the end anyway, it was just nice to see that intent from him in the first place. So once again here, I think James McArthur fully deserves the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our front three, and that is Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of Townsend's performance, obviously it was a little bit disappointing not to see a little bit more from him, but given the fact that how defensive we were in the game, the fact that we didn't have any plan B, and the fact that he obviously just came back from injury, sort of all them three things just combined together in the fact that he just had a really lacklustre performance. But obviously, just coming back from injury, he was obviously, much like McArthur, just restored into the starting 11. And to be honest, I do understand that, because of course he is one of our starters anyway, so of course he goes straight back into the team. And even though he did work quite hard up and down that right wing, he didn't really have any impact on the game. Particularly, when we had the limited chances we had on the counter-attack, it would have been a little bit nicer just to see him have more impact going forward, whether that be looking to get to the byline, actually test the Chelsea back four, put crosses in, but we didn't really see that in the game. And, like I've said, obviously it could be down to his injury. He's just come back from injury, thrown in straight into the front three against a team like Chelsea, who are going to be obviously difficult to break down. But then likewise, you could say, even though that is the case, obviously Hodgson obviously thinks you're fit enough to play and fit enough to make an impact in the game, so you should have obviously given more of an impact. But then likewise, you could say, because we approached the game so defensively, obviously limited us going forward, and then when we did obviously need to go forward, because we were 1-0, then we were 2-0 down, because we didn't have that plan B, obviously meant that people like Townsend couldn't go forward as much as they would have liked, or as much as they should have, to obviously try and at least get back into the game. And I think these sort of things all combined together in him having what was a quite lacklustre performance. And like I said, whether it was down to him just coming back from injury, whether it was just our approach to the game, which I think is the main reason, because we played so defensively and we didn't have any plan B, is why sort of our attacking players as a whole were neglected, didn't really play that well in the game. But then you could also say it's just, him himself not playing that well. So I do think overall the 5 is a fair result. Obviously, we've got an international break now, so in terms of the fitness side of it, he can get back to full fitness. And of course, we've got a big game against Liverpool coming up after the international break. So we really need Townsend to get back into it and be that attacking threat, because we're probably going to be setting up as defensive, if not more defensive, up against Liverpool. So we really need people like Townsend against teams where we have to play defensive. We need them to really take that sort of catalyst and actually try and go at the opposition, because most of the team's going to play defensive, so you need 1 or 2, even 3 of your attacking players just to go all out and sort of try and counter attack, because that's the only way you're going to get forward against a team like Chelsea when you're playing so defensive. So once again, disappointing performance from Townsend, and hopefully, given the international break and given the games we've got after that, hopefully he can come back to his best. Obviously, the second player, and he played primarily on the left-hand side, and that was Wilfried Zaha, who I'm also going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of his performance, obviously people talking about how well that Reece James actually did up against him, and whilst that was true throughout the game, I think Reece James done a good job throughout the game dealing with Zaha. There were other opportunities, other chances where actually he got past him a few times, and whilst nothing actually came off the back of that, Zaha was able on a few occasions to obviously get past him. So whilst loads of people are saying Zaha was in his pocket for the game, for the whole game, you've got to look at it and go, he did well against him, Reece James, but then likewise, Zaha did get the better of him on a few occasions. But the thing for me is that, yes, Zaha had a few moments in the game like that where he was able to get past the defence, but for the majority of the game he did cut a frustrated figure, and that's just because Chelsea dominated the game. Because we were so negative, obviously meant that we were playing so deep that when we got the chance to attack, people like Zaha and Townsend and I were so sort of deep in our own area, or just literally encroaching into that Chelsea area of the field, that we didn't actually have that impetus to go forward and attack. And that's why Zaha was a frustrated figure throughout the game, because even though Chelsea dominated, they had all of the possession. When we did have chances to go forward, because of that approach to the game, because of that no plan B, I suppose you could also say approach to the game, because of that obviously meant that we were really limited We were restricting what our forward players could do. Now, of course, you can understand Zaha getting frustrated, did pick up a yellow card for a foul on Willian. I think Willian also got booked for a foul on Zaha early on in the game, so I suppose if you look at it like that, they cancelled each other out. But that really just summed up his game in the fact that he was getting frustrated. Everything he was trying to do, some of it was coming off, but because of our approach to the game, there was either no one in the box or there was no one there to support him. And just the fact that Chelsea were just so good and so on form this season, obviously all of them things combined together in it obviously being a quite frustrating game from him. Now, of course, you could say that at times he was clearly rattled, obviously didn't really have the freedom to do what he would have liked to, so you can understand him being a little bit frustrated, a little bit rattled. But then you've also got to look at it and that, yes, it was a disappointing afternoon as a whole for the whole team, but when we had that chance to go forward, he didn't have that desired impact. Either Reece James got the better of him, or when he did get chances to get past him, there was no one there in the box. So you can understand him trying to have that impact going forward, but because there was no one there, or because he couldn't always get past the defenders, that also obviously combined in him having what was a disappointing performance. And like I've said already, yes, Chelsea are a good team, but just that one moment of magic from either Townsend or Zaha out wide, or Ayew in the middle, just that one moment of magic, that one chance, rather than just playing so deep and so defensive, just have that one chance up top. But because of our approach to the game, we weren't able to have that in the game, and that's why I've given Zaha a 5 here, which I think most people would probably agree with. So moving on now to the final player in our starting 11, and that is Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of him, obviously with Townsend coming back into the team and obviously Zaha playing on the left, obviously meant that Ayew was leading the line again. Not got a problem with that, but when you've got a team of the quality of Chelsea, you really realistically need 2 players up there, or you need your wide players to support him a little bit more, because even though Ayew was leading the line and he's done well there this season, obviously Chelsea are going to find it really easy to defend against him. So it would have been a little bit nicer just to have a few other players support him a little bit more. And, because, of course, that would have maybe led to us having a few more chances because there was someone for him to play off of. And, maybe that was because of our approach to the game, because we were playing so defensive, maybe someone like MacArthur couldn't play that far forward, couldn't be able to help Ayew, when he was leading the line on his own. Whichever way you've got to look at it, it would have been a little bit nicer to see a little bit more from Ayew, but then again, our approach to the game sort of limited what he could do. Now, in terms of the first half, obviously we were very, very good defensively. We kept it at 0-0, but actually that obviously meant that Ayew was neglected. He was chasing shadows for much of that first half, and that was obviously because Palace as a team were obviously struggling to get a foothold in the game. We were struggling to obviously get possession and have chances and be able to actually provide the ball to Ayew. But then likewise, because we were just playing so defensive, obviously it was just sort of wave after wave of Chelsea attacks. So you can understand Ayew not really getting chances there. But what you've got to give him credit for is the fact that even though he was getting no support, he was leading the line on his own when he didn't really have any support up there. The fact that he was still chasing down Chelsea defenders, that was really great to see. So even though he had nothing really to give in the game, nothing really given to him as well, the fact that he was just continuing to put pressure on the Chelsea defenders was of course good to see. But obviously all of that hard work didn't really combat in anything, and in an attacking sense he obviously had limited impact there. But like I said already, like you can see the theme. The fact that I've given the 3 attacking players all 5s really is a reflection of obviously our approach to the game, and the fact that we were so negative, it neglected our forward players. But then likewise, they didn't at least or try and have that one moment of magic to try and get past Chelsea. So the fact that we had our bad negative approach to the game, we had no plan B, as well as combining the fact that just the players weren't on their game, I think is overall why in an attacking sense we had quite a poor game, but then likewise why individual players didn't really play that well. So once again here, I do think Jordan Ayew deserves the 5 I've given him. So now I'm going to move briefly on to the 3 subs we made in the game. Obviously Martin Kelly came on for Ward, as I've already mentioned, 42 minutes or so. And obviously Jeffrey Slupp came on later in the game for MacArthur on 69 minutes. And of course James McCarthy came off for Chiarte later on in the game in the 81st. So in terms of Martin Kelly obviously coming in for Ward, that was obviously an enforced substitution. He obviously came into right back. Obviously Kelly hasn't played at right back since the Pardew era, and I think maybe briefly under Allardyce. So of course you can understand Kelly not being that comfortable there. And to be honest, even though we know he's not really good at playing at right back, given the fact that he's played his best at Palace when at centre back, but he didn't do too much wrong there. So given the fact that he was just brought onto the pitch and he was the only available player who could actually play right back, he done what he did and he didn't really do too much wrong. So I do think the 5 overall is a fair reflection there. Obviously, fingers crossed, touch wood, that Ward's injury isn't too serious, because we know that Martin Kelly isn't that comfortable at right back. But obviously, if he is out for a few weeks or so, given the fact that how well he performed, or not how well, but how he coped against Chelsea, that gives me a little bit more hope that actually Kelly may be a little bit better now at right back than he has been previously. And maybe that's down to the experience he's had at centre back, just giving him that defensive work. In terms of Jeffrey Slupp, obviously came on from MacArthur on 69 minutes. Obviously he was brought on just to bring a bit more impetus, a bit more pace in the midfield, but didn't really do enough to change the game, and that was just down to us not having a plan B, you know. Rather than bringing on a midfielder for a midfielder, you know, you've got someone like Benteke on the bench, and yes, Benteke hasn't scored this season. Obviously we know his form over the last few seasons has been absolutely dreadful, but at least bring maybe him on instead of MacArthur and go 2 up top, just to give us that plan B, to try something different, to try and actually have a go at Chelsea, rather than just bringing on a midfielder for a midfielder. And that's something which was really disappointing, because obviously Jeffrey Slupp was brought on to bring on that energy, bring on that impetus, which in any other game would have been fine. But when you're chasing the game and you've got actual attacking players on the bench, you've got your strikers on the bench, and you don't bring them on, it really just is a little bit disappointing, because Jeffrey Slupp came on, normally he does well for the team, but he didn't really do enough to change the game, and that's why he obviously slotted into the same system. If we just had that plan B, change the system, then maybe, you know, the players coming off the bench could have had more impetus and more impact there. Of course, James McCarthy came on for Chiarte, 81 minutes or so. He was just once again brought on just to help us see the game out. And another really negative substitution, you know, rather than bring on a defensive midfielder for a defensive midfielder, put on Benteke or put on someone else, just to give us that attacking impetus up top, because that was something we were lacking in the game. So at least bring someone else on who can bring us that impetus in midfield, rather than just bringing on a defensive midfielder when you're 2-0 down, just to help us see out the game. You know, just go for it. Even if we lose 3-0, at least we had a go by bringing on someone more attacking. But in terms of McCarthy, came on obviously to help us see the game out, had a shot from the edge of the box, and other than that didn't really contribute too much. And of course, he was booked late on in injury time as well. So overall, the 3 substitutions, other than Kelly, you've got to look at Slupp and McCarthy and go, didn't really have that much impact in the game. But then you've also got to go, and actually it wasn't their fault, because they just came into the same system that was already negative, and because we didn't try and at least be more creative and have that plan B, is ultimately why we obviously didn't get back into the game, but also why the substitution didn't quite work, because they were going into a system which already was proven not to work up against Chelsea. So in terms of just a small sort of summary of the game, just to sort of sum up my overall thoughts, you know, I've got to say that obviously most Palace fans will admit it and go, we can't obviously be helped but to be disappointed after the performance, because even though the result, you know, Chelsea are on great form, so obviously the result, that's fine, you know, you lose to Chelsea, that's going to happen, but the fact that just the way we performed and the way we had that negative approach from the game and we didn't actually have that plan B, that is a thing that's disappointing, because of course, you're not really disappointed with the result, because of course Chelsea are on great form this season, but obviously we're very, very disappointed with the performance, because we didn't see any sort of creativity from the team. We didn't see any plan B. We sort of just stayed defensive, which is good, but then once Chelsea scored, there's no point being defensive, because you know there's no way for you to get back into the game to actually make that defensive work count, and that was the thing that was really disappointing. And you know, like I've said, the defensive approach to the game started well, you know, it worked well up until Chelsea scored, because we had no plan B, we weren't able to get back into the game once they scored, which meant we were just backs up against the wall trying to keep it 1-0, and then when it goes to 2-0 we're trying to keep it at 2-0. You know, at that point you just throw on another player, and you know, yes, you risk losing the game, maybe 3 or maybe even 4-0, but at least when it gets to that point you have that plan B and you at least want to have a go at the opposition. And you know, we know our players are better than this. We know that if you can set them up attacking or offensively, and you have that plan B, they can actually hurt teams. And yes, Chelsea are a good team, but the fact that we didn't change our game plan and we didn't ask them any questions, we didn't actually try and at least put them under a little bit of pressure to get back into the game, is what was really difficult to see. Because whilst our defence was so good, you know, we just made Chelsea look really, really good, because we weren't at least trying to have a go. We weren't trying to test them, and that's the thing which is really difficult for us to understand as fans, in the fact that, you know, you're already 2-0 down. The worst that can happen is that you lose by a few more goals, but at least you try and give it a go to get back into the game, and that's really really frustrating to see. And I suppose what you've got to look back at the game and go, actually you can see the frustration of the players, because obviously they've been told to play defensive, which is good, but once you've gone 1-0 down, then you've gone 2-0 down, you want to actually look to get back into the game. And because of that approach and because of the way we've been set out in the game, you could see that the players didn't really look happy because they were asked to play in this certain way, but then when things happened, in terms of Chelsea scoring, they weren't obviously told to change their game to obviously allow us to go at them a little bit more. And that's the thing, obviously, which is disappointing for fans, really frustrating. But then when you've got players who look frustrated, because just ask the manager just to change the system to allow you to get back into the game. And that's something which would have been a bit nicer to see. And obviously it's a bit hard to judge that based on players' performances and their displays, that they were frustrated. But for me, it looked like players were frustrated because, yes, we've gone 2-0 down already against a team of quality of the opposition, like Chelsea. But, if we just had given a little bit more in the game, then of course, even if we still lost the game 2-0 or maybe even 3-0, at least we would have at least had a go at them. And I suppose what you've got to look at, and you've got to look at the players and go, actually, there probably wasn't much more they could do, and that's just because they were doing what they were told to do. They were obviously asked to sit defensive, contain Chelsea, and then obviously that meant that once they scored, we didn't have that opportunity. We weren't set up in a way which would allow us to counter-attack that, and that's obviously which was really disappointing, because of course we know that Chelsea are really good. They're obviously, they're one of the top 4 teams at the minute, and certainly one of the informed teams in the Premier League at the minute. But if we just had a little bit of a different approach, be more productive, and just at least try to have a go against them, because what's the worst that can happen at 2-0? Then maybe we could have got at least something throughout the game, even if it's a goal. Even if we lost the game 2-1, I would have at least been happy with a goal. But because of our negative approach from the game, is obviously why myself and obviously loads of other fans, just got to look on Twitter and say that's why we're obviously frustrated overall. But now what we've got the international break, so hopefully players who've just come back from injury can obviously get back to full fitness. We can reorganise, reshape, and we can't have the same performance against Liverpool coming up in 2 weeks' time. We need to obviously be defensive and very cautious up against Liverpool, which is fair enough, but we also need to have that plan B, or at least just have that ability to transition between that really, really defensive part of the bus role, get to that attacking, counter-attacking role. Because if we don't have that ability to transition between that, then it's just going to be the same again, where we'll probably lose 2-3-0 against Liverpool, and that's just because we play so defensive. So obviously the things to work on over the international break is obviously the fitness of the players just coming back, but also just setting up in a way which will allow us to both be defensive but also be able to attack Liverpool, because that's what we really need to do. We really need to exploit Liverpool to make sure that even if we are going to lose the game, we at least give it a go, and that's certainly something I want to see in 2 weeks' time. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that, give me my Man of the Match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game. I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, when you consider how negative and how defensive our performance was, and the fact that, even though the result was fine, because of course Chelsea were on form, the actual performance and the negative approach from us was the thing that we're disappointed with, it's obviously quite difficult to actually pick out 4 nominations for the award, and that's just because of how bad overall as a collective, our approach to the game was. But I've gone with players, or I've managed to pick out 4 players who I think, at least given the fact that how bad our approach was to the game, at least showed a little bit more than, let's say, other players did in the field. And that's why I think they're worthy of a little bit more credit. Not that much credit, but a little bit more credit than, let's say, other players on the field were. So I've gone with Vicente Gaeta, Gary Cahill, James Tompkins and James MacArthur. So as you can see here, they're sort of quite a defensive sort of theming there in terms of them 4 players. In terms of Gaeta, the fact that he made 2 fantastic saves from Pulisic, one of them early on in the game and then the other one after Abraham scored the first goal. So the fact that for the majority of the game Gaeta was making good saves, couldn't do much about the goals, and then of course, made them 2 saves in particular from Pulisic, was something I was impressed with, and that's why obviously I've put him forward for the award. In terms of Gary Cahill, the fact that he performed as well as he did, going back to his former club, was a thing that impressed me. The superb block in particular from Willian in the first half, and the injury time of the first half, that in particular really impressed me, because obviously he put his body on the line against his former club, making sure that obviously his new club, Palace, obviously making sure that one of his old teammates couldn't score against him. And the fact that he just overall put in a good solid defensive shift is why I want to give him a little bit more credit, and obviously like other players in the team. In terms of James Tompkins, likewise, he was very solid at the back for the most part. Obviously, yes, Abraham had a few chances prior to his goal, but on the most part Tompkins dealt with Abraham relatively well, and yes, he defended well on the most part and actually read the game really well, but he probably would have been certainly got a lot more praise in the game if he'd obviously converted that header which he put just wide. And obviously the final player was James McArthur, and you know, for me, the fact that he's just come back from an injury and performed better than some of the other players on the field is obviously what you've got to give him credit for. The fact that he, given the quality of the opposition midfield, the fact that he still looked busy, still looked to get involved, still looked to frustrate Chelsea was something which I was really impressed with. And whilst in an attacking sense he failed to make an impact, just helping out defensively, particularly in that first half, is what I want to give him credit for. Now, of course, it's a little bit difficult given the fact that how bad the performance was to actually pick out a man of the match, but for me, given the fact that he made as many good saves as he did and he couldn't really do too much about the goals, I'm going to give it to Vicente Guaita. So congratulations, Guaita. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. And, you know, like I already said, you know, the reason I've given it to him above people like Cahill, Tompkins and McArthur is just because of the good saves he made throughout the game. You know, to deny Pulisic not once but twice with good saves, as well as just being overall good throughout the majority of the game, is why I want to give him a little bit more credit than other players than that. Because of course the goalkeeper obviously has to stay stationary, whereas you'd expect, even though we were so negative, you want that plan B to have people like Cahill, Tompkins and McArthur, and obviously the rest of the team pushing slightly further forward and looking to get involved. So, you know, the fact that them players, you know, the outfield players could have done a little bit more in terms of the plan B, whereas Guaita, he done what he had to do, and it was just, you know, our negative approach which led to us conceding the goals, is why I'm obviously nominating Guaita for the Man of the Match award. Obviously, if you do disagree or you think I've missed someone out or you want to obviously share your opinion of it, of course feel free to comment that below. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Luka Milivojevic and Cheku Kouyaté following the game.
Luka, the team was under a lot of pressure during that game today. How tough was it?
Yeah, from my point of view, a very tough one. They played, in my opinion, well. We try, you know, we put a lot of effort, I think, in this game, but I must say that they played well. We try, maybe we missed a little bit more composure on the ball when we had it. But in the end, you know, we try to do our best. But in the end, we must say that they were better.
Do you feel like the second goal was quite an unlucky one?
Yeah, it was very unlucky. I think after block, the ball goes straight to the head of the guy. Very, very unlucky goal. But you know, after 1-0, when we conceded, we try to create, we try to play. We had few occasions where we can maybe try to score, to draw result. In the end, you never know what happened, but you know, any defeat is not easy to take. It hurt, but what we can do, we have to look positive, and I must say thanks as well to the traveling fans. They come to support, and you know, we were not happy. We tried to do our best to take some points, but in the end we lost, and we know we are all unhappy, but what we can do, we have to go forward, carry on and try to prepare next game to get some points.
And finally, we're in the middle, well, towards the end of what we knew was going to be a tough period of games. How do you stay level-headed and not get too down when you're not picking up as many points as you were, say, in the first 7 or 8 games?
But you know, last 3-4, and if we include the Liverpool 5 games, let's say it's like mini Champions League. Most of teams are from top of the table, and we know will not be easy. It's not easy when you don't get points, let's say in 3-4 games in a row. But you know, the schedule was like that. What we can do, we try to do our best to get something. That's the schedule we had this month, and Liverpool is next one. After that, I hope will be easier. And you know, if we beat Leicester last week, we should be 5th at the moment, but we didn't. That means that table is we are in the middle at the moment. But if we win a few games in a row, we will be up again, and I hope it will be like that.
Very good the first half, and the second half also. After the first goal, after just the first goal, yeah, Memphis come hard because yeah, we need to score the goal. But yeah, it's very hard game today. Yeah, just need to forget this game and to focus for the second one.
Is there anything do you think the team could have done better today?
Yeah, we go for everything. we fight for every ball. The shape is good. We give nothing. After the first goal, everything is done. It's very hard to go here to with 0 point because we come in here to take something. This is football. Just need to forget this one and come next 2 weeks to try to take something in our home game.
Well, it came up against a good Chelsea team today. What was your assessment of the game?
I thought that I got nothing to reproach the team with at all. I thought that we worked as hard as we always do. I thought they really stuck at their task well. I thought our organisation, our team shape was good throughout the game. I think the second goal was a little bit fortunate for them because it was a deflected block which fell kindly for one of their players. And I think had we been able to keep it to 1-0, the last 10 or 15 minutes could have been interesting because we were growing into the game. So it's one of those games really where all defeats hurt, but I can't really look at the team and even suggest there's a lot more they could have done other than what they did do.
Joe Ward went off injured. Have you got an update on that at all?
Well, he's injured his groin. He felt a pain in his groin, so it's obviously some sort of strain in the groin. I suppose we'll have to wait till next week when they do the scans to find out how serious that is. But it's obviously a massive blow for us because we don't have other fullbacks at the club other than Joel and Patrick, and we can ill afford to lose them.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Luka Milivojevic and Cheku Kouyaté had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Chelsea. But make sure to come back in the next 2 weeks for my post-match review of the game against Liverpool. So thanks for listening and remember to up the Palace.